We're honored today to have the authors of a newly published book. It's Images of Lake Charles, published by Arcadia Publishing. And the authors are faculty members at McNeese University. Dr. Janet Allred is a professor of history. Jessica Hutchings is an assistant professor of library science and reference library and department head. And Debbie Houston Johnson, I said it backwards, I'm sorry. I always call you Debbie Houston is the problem.
That's all right.
It's Debbie Johnson Houston, is the director of the Fraser Memorial Library and assistant professor of library science. Their images have come not only from the McNeese University archives, but from private collections, and we're honored to have them speak to us today.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Jessica Hutchings, and this is just our first slide of our PowerPoint presentation here. It shows a picture of the old telegraph office on Ryan Street back in the 1870s, and you can see some ladies on the front porch there. Janet, did you want to come up here and stand with me? Okay. And this right here is the cover of our book, and it shows an image taken from the Lake Charles Rice Carnival, and it was a big festival that was celebrated annually, celebrating the rice growing industry that was started by Seaman Knapp, and he was from Iowa, and he went all over the world researching different varieties of rice to choose the rice varieties that would be most successful in Southwest Louisiana. So he basically is the person that started the rice industry. Okay, sorry. All right. Do you want to know? Okay. All right, so we did several different things to acquire images for the book. Primarily, we searched all of the archive collections at McNeese State University. We have a wonderful archive at McNeese that collects materials documenting the history of Southwest Louisiana and the history of McNeese State University. And we very methodically scoured every collection that they had for all of their photographs. The ones that seemed especially interesting, especially clear, we had the archivist, Patty Threet, scan them into the collection, and we probably scanned, we scanned hundreds and hundreds of photographs from that collection. Also, the Louisiana Digital Library is something that we used, and it's a state effort. It's a big digital library organized by the State Library of Louisiana. And you can go to the Louisiana Digital Library and search its collections. So we went through, searched for Lake Charles. Any image that seemed particularly interesting, we saved it to a collection. Okay. Another thing that we did was get personal contacts. You can see this photo right here. This is of Charles Dixon's grandson. Charles Dixon is the owner of Tony's Pizza, and I had no idea when I moved here in 2005 that Tony's Pizza is not owned by an Italian family. Charles Dixon is Greek. His grandfather was a Greek immigrant. Actually, they were from Lebanon, but they have Greek ancestry, and they moved to America a long time ago. His grandfather was a haberdasher, and they made their way. Mr. Dixon ended up making his way down to Houston, making friends with, I forget the man that he made friends with, but he was a very wealthy man. The man gave him money to start his first restaurant called The Galley in an old bowling alley here in town. And then he saved enough money to buy one of the Tony's Pizza franchise restaurants. All of the Tony's Pizza franchise restaurants went under. His stayed alive. He maintained private ownership of it. And he's got a whole family of businessmen. And this is a picture of his grandson who recently graduated from McNeese in business, and he has his own businesses around town. Do you want to talk about Facebook?
I can do that. Do you want to mention this is one I didn't make the cut?
Oh yeah, this is one of the pictures that didn't make it into the book, and we're going to show y'all several pictures that we scanned that we just loved, but we just couldn't include because of limited space.
Yeah, they have, Arcadia, of course, publishes these, this is part of a series that Arcadia does in local history. They specialize in local history, and they do these all over the United States, and so they have a template that we follow. And so if anyone asks why didn't my picture make it into the book, that's why. It's because we had limited space that we had to fit all of the images in, and we just couldn't go beyond that. And so we just tried to make sure that we got a good representative sampling of the variety of people and businesses and cultures in our area, in Lake Charles, as part of that winnowing process. But sometimes there were really great photos like this one that we just couldn't find the space to put them in there. So the archives was a fabulous source for us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. All of the images in the book, we had to make sure that we had clear copyright on them. But after I was sure about that, a lot of times people will donate photos, but they're not clearly labeled. Some of them, for example, come from the Chamber of Commerce collection, and there was no way to know who those people were. And so I would put them up on my Facebook page and ask, and it was amazing. Every single one that I put up there, somebody jumped on that immediately and said, hey, I know that person. And within usually 24 hours, I had gotten the identification of that person. And they would put the word out to someone else, and then I could get the date, I could get the context, I could get the information that I needed for the caption. And there were several of them in the book that I was able to identify that way. So Facebook was just a fabulous source for us. We also had an article in the American Press, and that was another one that it was a Chamber of Commerce photo, and I didn't know the year, I didn't know who it was. And so the American Press was great, and they ran this article talking about the project, and they ran that photo, and again, by the end of the day, I had the person identified. Someone emailed me and said, oh, that's my husband, and sure enough it was. So I got the year, I got the event, I got the date that way. It was so much fun, because I was able to not only track down the information that I needed, but then I made these wonderful contacts as part of this too. We had a blast doing this book, I have to say that. Personal contacts, anything else anyone wanted to say about that? Did you want to talk about?
Good morning. Personal contacts was an area that I focused mostly on, particularly for trying to identify persons and collections in the African American community, because we wanted to make sure that our book did do an ethnically diverse representation of Lake Charles's population. Before we started the book, I did have a relationship with the owner of Gumbo magazine, which is the only African American newspaper in Southwest Louisiana, Lawrence Morrow. When I let him know that we were getting ready to do the book, and I was asking about particular families or dignitaries, anything that he thought we could use in regards to photograph, he says, well, I have a collection of over 10,000 pictures that you can use. And I looked at him and I said, 10,000 pictures? And he said, really, if you want to see my collection, I'll give it over to you, you can go through it. Well, I took the challenge and went by his office to, I really still didn't think he had 10,000 photographs, but sure enough, when I got there, he had this collection boxed up for me to take and go through it, and I did go through every one of his photographs, and the librarian in me started me cataloging his pictures and putting them in order. But anyway, we did get quite a few good pictures from his collection that we're going to share some of those with you today.
Okay, well, regarding the importance of the McNeese State University archives, this was just such an invaluable treasure to us as we began this project. Not only do they have a huge collection, but it is such a professionally run place to be and do your work. As we chose photos that we wanted to include in our book, the archivist, Patty Threet, scanned them. She has a big, sophisticated scanner that scanned them to the specifications that our publisher asked for us to use. She cataloged them for us, put them in the McNeese collections so that these materials are now available to the public. So if anybody else ever wants to go back and do another book using images or any other letters, political papers, personal papers, anything that's in an archive, Patty Threet can get it for you.
And I just want to let you know, you do have a real treasure in the McNeese archives. I received an email from a professor in Spain last week who wanted to come to the McNeese archives to do research this week. So you're well known, even though you may not realize it, but we are global archives that do serve the world.
Oh, also, a portion of the proceeds from the sales of this book will be donated to an account that will support the McNeese Archives. Okay, so for every photo that we chose to go in the book, we had to find something to say about it. We had to find out who was in the picture, when the picture was taken, and what exactly is the story to be told from the picture. If it was a building, you know, what was this building used for? Was anybody famous in this building? And so we had to find all of the stories in order to be able to describe the photos. And the American Press online archive of newspapers is amazing. It has the very best it's the very best newspaper archive I've ever had to deal with, and that includes the New York Times and everything. So whenever we had a picture that we needed to find some information on, we would go search the archives, look at every article, and try to piece together some facts in order to make the description of the picture interesting. Also, we had to interview a lot of people. I sat with Mr. Dixon in his office at Tony's Pizza for 2 hours getting the story to tell about his photos, and it was very interesting. There are a lot of books that have been written by local people about the history of Lake Charles. There was a really wonderful book about the history of the Catholic Church that was particularly helpful. The Maud Reed scrapbooks were very helpful as we...
This place donated them to the McNeese Archives.
Oh, okay.
They still own the copyright on that.
Okay, okay.
Genealogy Library actually owns them.
Right, the genealogy library owns those. And then we searched also the Louisiana Digital Library for extra information about the photos that we saw. Okay.
Sure. And this is one of the things that we encountered a lot when we were especially going out into the community and asking people to donate images for the book. That might have helped to fill in some gaps perhaps in our archival holdings, was that a lot of people, you don't think when you're alive, you think everyone is going to know who these people are forever, but then when someone passes away and there's a box of photos that no one can identify, all of a sudden that information is lost. And we ran into that a lot. So it's very important. This is one of the things that I wanted to point out, and certainly we ran into a lot when we were trying to acquire these photos, is not only that you preserve your photos, but that you preserve the information that goes along with them, which means sit down and identify the people, identify the place, identify the stories behind them, and people assume that people will know in later generations, and they just won't. So again, one of the missions of Arcadia is that, preservation of these photos, because not only did we find that people didn't know a lot of the stories behind the photos, but people had lost a lot of material, either because someone didn't treasure it and they threw it out, or you know what happens in southern Louisiana, weather, right? In fact, a lot of people lost things in the hurricanes. Their stuff had just gotten wet and they had ended up throwing it out. So part of the reason that we like this project is it encourages people to preserve through digitization, because as she was mentioning, we scanned the images and therefore they will all be there. They will be preserved in that format. And just to clarify, a lot of the people who in fact most of the people who donated images for the book actually didn't give us the physical image. Either they or one of us brought it to the library, Patty scanned it, so we have the digital version, but we gave them the original back, okay? So again, that's just a form of preservation of these things that otherwise end up getting tossed by somebody, or they get lost in a hurricane or something like that. And that's one of the things that distinguishes the Arcadia books from maybe a coffee table book or something like that of historic architecture in Lake Charles, is that Arcadia is about preserving old photographs. So most of the photographs in the book are old. There were some that are newer. We'll show you a couple of those later on when we flip through the PowerPoint.
Just a word on preserving your own collections. McNeese Archives does, in celebration of Preservation Month, which is coming up in April, I believe, we do have preservation workshops of your photographs that are open to the public. We also have literature brochures that are available for you to take and share with family members to help you in preserving your own collection. So Patty Threet's name is one that we put up before with the contact information, so feel free to contact her at any time regarding that information, and I am confident she will be willing to share that with you.
All right, now we'll go ahead and show you the structure of the book itself. It's divided into several chapters, kind of chronologically. From the beginning of Lake Charles, it starts in, we don't try to go before 1867. I don't know if most of you probably know this, but there is a couple of other books that are in this series that also deal with local history, and one of them was done by Robert Benoit, and that was on Imperial Calcasieu. So that covers the kind of the earlier period, and so we tried not to duplicate that, not to replicate what he had already done on Imperial Calcasieu. And we may have a couple that are shared, but most of these images are different. And we started in 1867, which is when Lake Charles was incorporated. There's also a book in their series on McNeese itself, which they have a college series also. So again, we didn't do much in the book with McNeese because we have, Kathy Bordelon actually had done the McNeese book within the college series. So we started with some of the early history, but basically concentrating on 1867 and later. The founders of Lake Charles is the first chapter, and of course we talk about the lumber industry. I think both of these are photos that come from our archives, and these are, this is a photograph of Daniel Goss's mill workers. So you can see, again, it's an ethnically diverse mix. The lumber industry is what built Lake Charles. In the 19th century, of course, the Calcasieu yellow pine, very famous. These huge forests all around us were untouched, untapped, and untouched. And so you got the lumbermen who came in and were able to develop that industry, and that's what made Lake Charles into a growing metropolis. And one of those people who helped to build the lumber industry in Lake Charles was Daniel Goss, and there we have his wife, Catherine Moline Goss. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that correctly, not being someone who knows a whole lot about German, but we call her the mother of Lake Charles. I'll flip back to that in just a second. I hope you don't mind me flipping the PowerPoints like that. But at any rate, Daniel Goss, who had actually come before the Civil War, was one of these people who helped to develop the lumber industry in Lake Charles, showing his mill and home, Gossport, of course, named for him. And he was an immigrant from northern Germany, as was his wife, as were many of their workers. They actually went back to their homeland and recruited a lot of people to come over. So that's why we have a lot of streets in the older areas of Lake Charles that have German names on them. Well, Moling Street, you recognize that name, of course. Catherine Street is named for his wife. Fitzenreiter, again, a lot of names you recognize there. These people were not all German, but they married some of the children. There were 15 children. That's why we call her the mother of Lake Charles. She looks pretty good, doesn't she, for 15 children? There were 15 children, and only 4 of them were boys. And so the 11 were girls, and they married into, these are their husbands' names, and so these are descendants of the Gosses. Their descendants number in the thousands in Lake Charles, and other areas, of course, also as well. Let's see, what else did I want to say about that? Anything? Oh, I was going to talk about how I got this photo. This is an example of one where I talked with Billy and Kay Blake. I'm sure most of you know them. And Kay Krause Blake is a direct descendant of the Gosses. And she, of course, has huge boxes full of photos, and she just allowed me to sit and go through them. And we were trying to avoid actually kind of just studio portrait things. We wanted photos because then it just becomes sort of head and shoulder shots throughout, and we thought that would be boring. And then we tried to get things like this that show the scenery as well. So I was flipping through. She had a lot of studio portraits of people in her family, any one of which would have been good. But this, so far as I know, this is the only known portrait of Catherine Moline Goss, the mother of Lake Charles. And it was a little tintype, one of those little velvet case boxes that you open up. You can see it's a little raggedy around the edge. Some of the backing has worn off over the years. And I opened that up and I said to Kay, "Who is this?" And she said, "That's Catherine Goss." I said, "Would you mind if we took this one?" I was so excited because we had no image of the mother of Lake Charles, Catherine Moline Goss. And so that's the only known image that I'm aware of this woman who was so important in helping in a lot of different ways to build and develop, she and her family, the lumber industry in Lake Charles. Okay, so we have quite a few pictures about those people who came over and built the lumber industry. Schooners were very important. One of the reasons that Daniel Goss went back to Germany to get people to come over was because he needed people who could build schooners. And the Germans were skilled schooner builders, and that's how they originally got the lumber out, of course being shallow draft, right? You had to be able to get out the waterways, to go out to the Gulf, to get to Galveston, to ship out from that point, and there wasn't a railroad originally. Once the railroad comes in, that changes, but they built schooners, and Germans were skilled schooner makers, and so they imported a whole lot of people to come over just for that purpose. And again, we'll see, so you have an ethnic neighborhood where people speak only German in North Lake Charles, or what is today North Lake Charles, but was at the time pretty much Lake Charles, right? This is Battle Row, correct? This is Battle Row, which was an area, again, as the lumber industry developed, here's another picture of that same area. And as the railroads came in, the lumber industry really boomed, because then, of course, you can use these machines to transport the logs, and there's much more, a bigger industry that develops, much more commercial. So they're bringing a lot of people in as loggers, right, in the workforce, to help develop the lumber industry. And as a result, when they would get off on Saturday nights, and they were often single men or men without their families with them, they had a lot of money in their pocket because they had gotten paid, and Saturday nights were the night when you could go indulge in a pleasure culture. Let's put it that way, in Lake Charles. And there were many different ways that you might spend that money, some of which, they're illegal today. Let me just put it that way, many of those things. And so because men were, not all of them are illegal, but because men were alone and kind of footloose, you had industries to service them, including saloons. There was usually gambling parlors behind these saloons, and because men had a lot of cash and not a lot to spend it on, they would often get real drunk, and so there would be fights, and those fights would often spill out into the streets, and so Battle Row, that's why it was called Battle Row, but it was Railroad Avenue, and again, I'm sorry, I flipped to the wrong way. It serviced these men. So again, you can see there's an ethnic mix because the workforce was ethnically mixed. It's an integrated workforce, people of a variety of backgrounds and ethnicities. This is chapter 3. One of the things that we wanted to do was again show the ethnic diversity of Old Lake Charles, and an easy way to do that was to talk about the congregations. And so there's a number of photos that we had in our archives of this. This is the earliest, this church still exists, the oldest existing church building. It still exists. Do you recognize it? Grace Rescue Mission? Good. And it was built by the Gosses originally. It did burn at one point, but they reconstructed it, and it wasn't completely obliterated. So reconstructed it. Anyway, built in 1888. It was formerly called German Street today because everybody spoke German on that street. Those were all people who were related to the Gosses or worked for the Gosses or built schooners for the Gosses or managers in the Goss mills or things, or the other mills, because there's other lumber mills as well, owned by some of the men I mentioned in the previous slide. But this was a Lutheran congregation because that's what their religion was, and that would be common, that you would get congregations established for the different ethnic groups. And because they were from Germany, the services were conducted in German, and that was true. They had at least one service that was conducted in German through the 1930s. There were other services that were conducted in English too, but some also conducted in German. I'll let Jessica talk about this.
Okay, this is a picture of the newly built convent for the Sisters Marianites of Holy Cross. And the Sisters Marianites, the ones that came to Lake Charles, there were 4 nuns that came here, lived in a very small, they called it a convent. It was just a tiny little house in downtown Lake Charles. I want to say it was on Pujo Street. It was very close to where the current Immaculate Conception Cathedral is now. But it was a very small house. They called it the Little Chateau, and it was their convent until this one was built right here. When this was built in 1884, it was the largest and most elegant building in Lake Charles, and it was destroyed in the fire of 1910. Do you want to talk about after the fire? Okay. Oh.
Go back to the churches for just a second. Sure. In addition to the early congregations, there was also strong Jewish congregation population that helped to start Lake Charles, and I'll just read you the caption from our book. And what's so interesting about this particular Jewish temple is that it is currently on the, it's Temple Sinai, which probably most of you know today, and it is on the National Register of Historic Places in the United States, and it continues to be a thriving place for worship of the Jewish community in Lake Charles. So it was built in 1904, constructed in the Romanesque temple style, displaying two Byzantine-style onion domes. And this photograph is also highlighted on the web too, so if you ever have an opportunity to take a look at the history of it there, it's also cited. In addition, we did talk about some of the development of the early African American churches in Lake Charles, of which Reeves Temple is one that we did highlight in our book as well.
And I just want to say, if you don't mind, Dr. Watson, I can point you out in the back. You slipped in and I didn't see you come in there. Dr. Thomas Watson is here, I'm pleased to see, and he's former chair of the history department at McNeese. And he also helped with a lot of, especially this early information, and read the manuscript for us and caught a few mistakes that we would have made otherwise. I can't say that it's completely error-free at this point, so if you do notice anything that needs to be changed or corrected, please do let us know. A few things do slip through the cracks, but I do want to acknowledge his expertise in early Lake Charles history, especially in the schooners. I got a lot of information about the schooner and the lumber industry and the schooners from research that he has done in McNeese Archives. Is that right? In the McNeese Archives, yes. Important source. Everybody knows about the Great Fire, right? Of 1910, and burned much of downtown Lake Charles, already existing Lake Charles. This, I love this photo because it's a panorama. You can probably see how we spliced it together. We had to do that digitally too, although it is hanging on the wall of Mayo Land Title Company, and it is spliced exactly as you see here on the wall, Mayo Land Title Company. And how many of you know the story of Mayo Land Title? What happened with that? Okay. When the Great Fire happened in downtown Lake Charles, it burned up the public buildings, including the courthouse, and so the records were lost. And Mayo Land Title, which had been founded by Thad Mayo, and we have a picture of him, and we have the story of Mayo Land Title, and they have also donated their records to the McNeese Archives, if you're interested in more of that history. But Mayo Land Title, one of the Mayos is also married to one of the Knapp daughters, so there's a relationship between Seaman and Knapp there. They were smart enough that they had put their land records in a fireproof vault. And so when the fire happened, they had those records. They preserved the records. And so they have been a valuable source of information for our history because they thought ahead to preserve the records by putting them in a fireproof vault. So anyway, after the fire, there were new fire codes put into place to try to prevent this from happening again. Included that public buildings must be built of stone and they must have slate roofs. And so what you got was a whole bunch of new structures. This is downtown Lake Charles. I'm sure you recognize at least 3 structures there. To the left in the photo is the cathedral. At the time it was a church. Kind of directly in that middle panel you see City Hall, and then on the right you see the courthouse. And they were all, those buildings, along with several other structures, including Central School, and we have a picture of that later on in the book, those were all designed by the very prestigious New Orleans architectural firm, Favreau and Libidet, quite famous. And they came over and designed those, as well as a number of public and private homes in Lake Charles. So they all kind of have a theme or a thread that goes through them. I guess I'll talk about the quarries and the IUs, and I have a couple of those in the audience too. So we have a variety of pictures that show Lake Charles as it was rebuilt after the fire. One of the themes too, I'm sorry, I'm flipping around, I'm just not exactly sure what's coming up here. Again, one of the things that we tried to make sure that we did was cover ethnic diversity, the different ethnic groups in Lake Charles, who built Lake Charles, who helped to build Lake Charles, and who have enriched our history immeasurably. And as I mentioned, I reached out to some people and asked for donations when we couldn't find what we were looking for in our own holdings, in our archives. And this was one that I wanted to be sure that we highlighted was various types. I have those other ethnic groups represented in other areas of the book, but I didn't have any pictures from the Lebanese who had come into our area. And so Daniel Ayub, whom I know because he taught me high school, and he taught me history, American history in high school for one thing, and he also worked with me at McNeese, provided this photo. And this is Daniel, that's Daniel on the right with his brothers and sisters and a cousin and a grandmother who was a Corey in her home. That's in the front yard of her place. Do you remember the street? I don't want to say Shell Beach?
Lakeshore Drive.
Lakeshore Drive, yeah, Lakeshore Drive. And so the Lebanese came in right around the turn of the century, a little bit after the turn of the century. I've got all of that information in the caption to this photo. And again, enriched our culture so much and in so many ways. Like so many of these immigrants, there's a push factor and a pull factor. They were being pushed out and they were being attracted, right? In immigration studies, we talk about a push factor and a pull factor. And the push factor was that there was a lot of poverty in Lebanon, and there was oppression from the Ottoman Turks. And the men were getting drafted into the military, and so a lot of them were migrating and there was a famine. I mean, some of them I'm not saying the Kurds or the Ayubs, but a lot of them, their relatives back in Lebanon, which wasn't its own country at the time, starved to death. I mean, there was a terrible, terrible famine. So there was a push factor. And then they found South Louisiana a welcoming place, and they found South Louisiana a familiar place because many of them had had exposure to French because the French had been active in that area. So a lot of them spoke French. And they were a variety of Christianity that devolved or descended from French Catholicism. And so they were at home. Some of them joined the Catholic Church, some of them joined the Episcopal Church because they're high church, and they were familiar with that background. So that's just another one of the examples of the ethnic groups. We're a very ethnically diverse place, like Charles is.
Okay, I can talk about these. Okay, we spent a chapter talking about the modernization of Lake Charles, and this is one example of a photo of downtown Ryan Street. I think this was taken in the early 60s, wasn't it? Yeah. Right, right. And this landscape is completely different now. It went through a series of changes through the years. In the 60s, later 60s, early 70s, Mayor Sudduth had a big plan to change downtown, and later on we've got some photos of it. But he blocked off the street. He blocked off Ryan Street. He created a downtown mall, an outdoor walking mall, and he rerouted a bunch of the streets to make a bunch of them one way. So that's why we have some one-way streets around here. And he did this in order,
Yes, put an end to this.
Right, right. And it ended this. A lot of businesses went under. He did this in order to compete with the Preon Lake Mall that was being built south of town. And Preon Lake Mall ended up being a lot more successful than Sudduth's project downtown. He ended up building the big parking garage that was recently demolished. Also at that time, the Civic Center went in. He arranged for all of the land to be filled in on the lake in order for us to have Bois du Lac Drive and the park and the Civic Center. So that was all part of his downtown revitalization projects.
Let me just say, and we really like just the photo itself, but also you recognize a lot of the buildings, right? You remember the Paramount Theater and the downtown streetscape. You can recognize that, and that's the Charleston Hotel in the background, right? So again, we tried to put some images in there that where people would immediately recognize the buildings, the landscape, in addition to putting photos in that show how it has changed over time as well. Jessica, this was Jessica's favorite. She loved it, or one of her favorites, I have to say. She loved this picture because it showed how people lived by the river when they kind of made a living out of the river. They were often really poor people that lived around the river, and they pulled their dinner out of the river. You know, they would shrimp or crab or something like that, and which is so strange to us today because we think of, you know, the riverfront property as just being so valuable. But there were a lot of people that lived kind of like this on the river. And Jessica liked this. First of all, did she really live in that place? Yes, she did. It's one of our archival photos. And then it also has a picture of Governor Lesh on it. You can't really see it very well in this image, but that's Governor Lesh is her hero. And I don't know if you know much about Louisiana politics, but Governor Lesh was a Longite. He was associated with the Huey Long regime, and therefore poor people would have supported him. He did 4 years in federal prison. Was he the first governor to go to jail? First governor, okay. First Louisiana governor to go to jail. Anything else you wanted to say about that? Or?
Okay, well, this is an example of a very old Mardi Gras parade. This is actually Pujo Street, and they had this, a ferry was coming in to drop people off, and all of the Mardi Gras parade participants are walking through, and they're onlookers observing. What was the building called, Jane?
Pleasure Pier.
The Pleasure Pier was out, and it of course isn't there any longer, and all of this area is now filled in with sand as well.
Jessica, that was actually the city market. The Pleasure Pier was further.
Oh, the Pleasure Pier was further down Shelby,
This was
right?
adjacent to
It was the
market.
market.
That's right, that
Okay.
building,
That building is the market, okay.
on the beach, yeah.
Okay, this is another photo from the Rice Day Carnival. The cover photo for our book is, of a float that they had, and this picture is really funny because it shows how rice can fatten you up. This guy in the back, he didn't eat his rice, so he therefore weighs 84 pounds, but his twin brother has been eating rice and weighs a good 450. So this is one of the most hilarious photos that we found, given to us by John Owens, who had a great collection of photos that we used for the book. The Rice Day Carnival actually, they no longer have it here in Lake Charles, but the current Crowley Rice Festival that they have is sort of its descendant. Okay, you want to talk about?
Music and arts was one of my favorite parts of working with the book. I am a native of the area from Kendall, Louisiana, and Delafosse is my maiden name. So I'm tied to the Zydeco culture here in Louisiana. So I had a blast doing this part of the book, and that Buzu Chavis picture is from the Lawrence Gumbo collection. Yes, he did have 10,000 photographs. This photograph helped us learn more about where Mr. Chavis was from, and we learned about the Dog Hill community of Lake Charles, which we had not heard about before. So in listening to Mr. Morrow's stories, it was really interesting when I would visit him. It was more just conversation. We'd start looking at a photograph, and then he'd go off into these stories about these different families and their heritage, and then he said something to me about Buzu. He said, oh yeah, he was from the Dog Hill community. And then I'm like, Dog Hill community? And then he goes into the story telling me all about it. And then we did the research, we did find out it is that area on the other side of Common and McNeese. And there is a highway named after him, Memorial Highway. And his grandchildren now carry on his legacy in the annual Labor Day Buzu Chavis Festival, and there's also they also have a band as well.
Let me just again acknowledge that Dr. Watson helped us clear up that Dog Hill. We were not exactly sure where Dog Hill was, but Dr. Watson, Tom Watson, can tell you more about that because it had to do with the rodeo culture too, right?
Racehorses.
What, racehorses?
Racehorses.
Racehorses, that's right. So
Trained racehorses.
they trained racehorses.
T-Cal.
Okay, well,
Road
oh.
is named after the racehorse.
TK, what was it?
T-Cal, T-E-K-E-L.
T-E-K-E-L, T-Cal, named after the racehorse, I see, okay.
Racehorse trainer.
T-Cal, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't know the name of that street. And, but he's the authority on all things having to do with horses in our area. I think all of the history of horses, but Dr. Watson knew all about that, so he helped fill in some of the gaps and some of the misconceptions that we had when we went to caption that. So you see, again, it took a lot of research and a lot of eyes on it and a lot of working to make sure that we got those kind of details right. And I'm not sure that we got them all. So if you notice a few things, if you notice anything, be sure you tell us.
Just a word on the details. At the beginning of the presentation, Janet mentioned about the template that we had to follow to limit us to the number of photographs that we could use, but they also limited us to the number of words that we could write per caption. And I think they were between 50 and 70 words. So trying to put someone's life into 50 and 70 words was quite a challenge, but with the three of us working together and all of our other resources, we were able to do that.
Okay, this is a picture of the Lake Charles Little Theater Group from 1937, and Rosa Hart is the woman who started the Lake Charles Little Theater, and of course we have Rosa Hart Theater now in the Lake Charles Civic Center. And the most interesting thing to me about this particular photo is it's taken on the second floor of the Masonic Hall on Hodges Street. And I'm not from here, and I don't, you know, doing this book was my way to learn about the history of this place. I never knew that, but the Masonic Temple on Hodges Street was used for all kinds of things. A long time, all kinds of community things. There was a, you know, a post office in there, and on the second floor where they have their ceremonies, they have, you know, anybody can use that area. So the Lake Charles Little Theater did a lot of performances in here until they were able to have their own theater. We were able to get a tour of the Masonic Temple actually while we were doing the research for this, and that was really interesting. It still looks exactly the same as this picture.
Yeah, it was very, very interesting. We all learned a lot of stuff doing this book. Like I said, it was so fun to do it. And one of the things that we learned about the Masonic Temple was that a lot of the early congregations actually held their services in the temple until they could get enough capital resources to be able to build their own buildings. So the Masonic Temple served a lot of different communities. One thing I was going to say was that they have a template that you follow, but they don't tell you what to put in the book, obviously. These chapters were chapters and ideas that we came up with based on what we were able to find and what we thought was important about our history to put in there. And there's a certain amount of individuality that goes into it too, so those things that are interesting to us are things that we wanted to put in here. And so we have this chapter on the arts, which includes a lot of the arts groups in Lake Charles, especially the older arts groups that have been around for a long time in Lake Charles, because that's very important to us and certainly to me, but there is no chapter on sports in this book, so I'm sorry about that, but that's again just a little individual, shows how our individual personalities coming out of it. Maybe it says something that there's 3 women that authored the book, I don't know. Maybe that would be silly for me to say that, but at any rate, we do have a chapter on the arts that showcases a lot of the arts groups, because to me, Lake Charles is such a vibrant artistic community in so many different areas. It's amazing to me, actually, the cultural output in Lake Charles, coming from so many different quarters, so I thought it would be remiss if we didn't showcase that.
I just want to say another word about the music and arts culture. While we do have a lot of the older art and music people in our book, we did pay tribute to some of the younger generation who are still making history. And a couple of those, one is Chris Audwin, who many of you are probably familiar with, and then there was a young man named Jarius Daigle, who's 13 years old. He's a violinist that we did include in our book as well.
Let me just say this. Sorry. And many of you know him. That's Chester Daigle's son. He's rocketing up. He's got a good career ahead of him.
Okay, this was the Lake Charles Rodeo Fair, and Rodeo Fair Parade, and this is Lee Jano. Am I saying that right? Was she a KPLC personality? I think. Yeah. She had her own show, and she was very perky. No, please.
She was the Oprah of Lake Charles. Would that be fair? She was the Oprah of Lake Charles, and don't you love this photo? Isn't this great? Of Lee Jano. If you knew her, if you remember her on TV, that is just so Lee Jano. She was really way out there, right, on the parade. So, was there anything else you wanted to say about that? Okay. So again, we have a chapter on familiar faces, people that you're likely to remember from back in the day. I'm sure you all recognize Jim Beam. Again, the Lake Charles American Press was just such a good source for us in terms of the information. Unfortunately, they had a fire too, and they don't keep their photos beyond 6 months. And their earlier photos, if they had them, most of those had been lost. But meanwhile, fortunately, they had donated a lot of the very early ones to the McNeese Archives. And so those actually came originally from the American Press, a lot of those. But I was hoping that we would be able to go to the American Press and get a lot of their images, because I thought they would have preserved them, but it turned out that they didn't have them. So I had to go use our archives. We used our, and again, just to ask people. But this was in our archives, actually. This was from MSU Archives. So a bunch of different familiar faces, and I did put Rob Robin in here from the KPLC days, and I had to go ask Rob Robin, and I had to go very roundabout, but he put it on a CD for me, and he donated, and I love that photo too, because if you remember Rob Robin drawing those lines, right?
Okay, so chapter 9 was our final chapter, describing the modern era. We've got a lot of contemporary photos in this chapter. This particular photo shows the construction of the, well, it's the Capital One Tower now. Back then it was the CW Tower when it was new. It's Calcasieu Marine Building. And what's interesting about this particular photo is you can now see the Civic Center and the boardwalk and everything all built up after all of the various revitalizations to downtown. Okay. And here's the picture of that downtown shopping mall that Seta's created. Streets are blocked off, people are supposed to walk around, but instead everybody went to Prion Lake Mall where they had air conditioning and a roof. And so therefore a lot of these buildings businesses are no longer there. Now this picture shows, it's a very contemporary picture of the lakefront now, taken by Dennis Thibodeau. Dennis Thibodeau is a local engineer that works at C-Gov, correct? And he was just a guy that saw an article in the American Press and contacted us, said that he goes around Lake Charles taking all kinds of pictures of things, and his pictures are beautiful. They're fabulous, and he was so generous to not only donate a lot of pictures to us, but he would go out and take pictures. If we needed a picture of something, I think we have a picture of Dr. DeBakey's statue in the front of Central Library, and he went and took a beautiful picture of it for us. And so this is the boardwalk as it looks now with its recent renovations, and it's very pretty.
That's where we end up. So, do we want to take photos now because we're running
Well,
out of time, or do you want to?
Well, do y'all want to see some photos that didn't
Yes.
make the cut? Okay, right here we've got a couple of structures that were at Puget Street and Ryan. This first picture is the old Knapp drugstore where the current Puget Street Cafe is. Knapp drugstore turned into Gordon's drugstore eventually with the current building, which doesn't really look so much like that now.
That is Puget Street.
Yeah, that is Puget Street Cafe now, but the little, what are those called, dormers that stick out of those are no longer there. Yeah. Okay, bridges in Lake Charles. If you would continue south down Ryan Street, this was the bridge that went over Contraband Bayou, I guess near where our library is now. And then, of course, the other bridge is the old Highway 90 bridge that was, I'm not sure when it was destroyed, I guess when I-10 went up, but the remnants of that old Highway 90 bridge you can see by the Bridgepoint Yacht Club, by the Isle of Capri Casino, and by the port. You can see it by the port. All right, some photos of downtown here. We've got the old City Hall that was where the current 1911 City Hall sits, and then this is a picture of it after it was destroyed. And then, of course, another photo of downtown after some of the buildings were rebuilt after the fire. Okay, do you want to talk about the Borden's ladies?
I really wanted a picture of the three Borden's ladies. I wanted that so badly because I grew up in Lake Charles and we walked to Borden's on 7th Street on the corner of, you all remember Borden's Creamery and the three very famous Borden ladies. And I thought I had found it. I thought I had hit pay dirt. The Borden's people, there's a connection, I don't want to say because I might get it wrong, but there's a connection between the Borden's people and the Dairyborn today. And he inherited a lot of the equipment and stuff like that. And so he had these photos and he let me, let us scan them, but he didn't know who they were. And so then when I finally was able to identify the women, I thought it was the women that we all remembered from the 60s and the 70s, but it turned out it wasn't. You knew that.
I did.
You did.
Because the lady with the lipstick is
Yeah,
not in there.
the lady with the lipstick is not in there. The eyebrows and the lipstick, and we remember them so well because they worked there for so long, and they had such personalities but I couldn't find them, so I couldn't put them in there. I really hated to take that out because I wanted to put those Borden ladies in there, but they were not the right Borden's ladies. And then on the right.
Yeah. The picture on the right is a picture of students at Sacred Heart Elementary School. This is in probably the early 60s, and they're all at little reading booths. And we found all kinds of really adorable school children pictures in our collection, and I thought that this was interesting. Things have changed a lot. We don't learn to read this way anymore. Okay, and then this set of photos is just to show some of the festivals and parades that go on here. Obviously, we've got two photos from the rodeo parade, and then this one down here, this is this Washington Marion High School or LC Boston? But it's a Mardi Gras parade that's happening there. Okay, do you want to talk about these?
These are some, well, back in the early 90s, Gumbo Magazine would have their annual Gumbo Cook-Off, which was actually a festival for different of entertainment. And the woman playing the accordion is Rosie Ledette. Most of you may be familiar with her. She's one of the well-known female Zydeco artists from Lake Charles. And I can't remember who this is. Bubba Letcher, Nellie Letcher's brother. Yeah, I thought that was really cool. We wanted to put it in the book as well, but we weren't able to do so. But what really got my attention was his hairdo.
Also,
we
we
do have Nellie in the book.
Right. And we do have a picture of Bubba Letcher. However, it's he's older in it. It's a picture of him being a DJ at the radio station where he worked. Okay, and I don't really know a whole lot about these pictures. I just thought that they were really interesting. This first one says it's the last streetcar in town, and apparently when the streetcars were no longer in operation, this particular one was a place where you could go get lunch, you could go get sandwiches. Yeah? Okay. And then this is just another home. This woman lives on a houseboat, and Maud Reed was a nurse, right? And she would go around and take health, take the vitals of all of her community members. And so she took a picture of this woman, and because this is a houseboat kind of in a swampy, marshy area, malaria was kind of a threat back then. So. All right, that's all. Thank you all for coming today. We will have copies. Yeah, we'll have copies of the book available. They're $22 each. But does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Where was that panoramic view of the new buildings in Lake Charles? Where was that taken from?
Well, I don't know what building it was.
Let's repeat the question.
Okay. He was talking about the panoramic photo taken by the Mayo Land Title Company with the view of downtown and the new buildings that were built after the fire. Where did they have the camera when they took that picture? We're not really sure. The courthouse?
No, it was in the picture. No, it's probably aerial, actually. Aerial photos. Yeah, aerial, because we have several actually aerial photos from a different collection that are around that time.
That looked soon after the fire. It looked soon after they were rebuilt, so
Too soon, you think?
I think it was
Yeah.
before aerial.
Okay, it could be. I don't
It was
know.
right after the new courthouse was built?
Probably, it
And
looked, yeah.
the new church, and that was in 1912, I don't think.
Okay. I don't know. It doesn't say where it was taken from.
I have an idea.
Yeah?
Possibly from the original Calcasieu Bank.
Original Calcasieu Bank Tower
They were on the corner of Ryan and Puget.
on the corner of Ryan and Puget, possibly.
Just from up there.
Okay, good idea. Thanks. Did anyone have any other questions? No? Too close, someone says. That's not the answer. I'm sorry?
Will it be on Amazon?
The book? Oh, yes, the book is available on Amazon, yes. And also on Arcadia's website also. And Books A Million, we have a book on the 25th, which is a Saturday, February 25th, there's a book signing at Books A Million at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Sure, no, go ahead.
Gordon's drugstore eventually turned into Riffs. And when we girls that working at clerk of court's office would leave Riffs to go to Crest to get a cup of coffee at 3 o'clock, they would have Estee Lauder perfume spraying Ryan Street. And we all had to walk in front of it to get our dose of Estee Lauder.
Gordon Drugstore became Riffs, is what you
Yes.
said? Yes, okay. One other person?
The picture you showed up there about the little theater with a 1937 date, and I had a hard time hearing, so I thought I heard y'all talk like that might be in the Masonic Lodge?
Yes, that was taken in the Masonic Lodge,
They
on the
had-
stage.
They had their own building. I don't know whether it was 37 or not, but in that time frame of the Wells Fargo stable,
The stable?
they were on Bilbo between Belden and Lawrence.
Right, the stable playhouse. Diane, do you know what was going on in 1937, that they might have been staging the play there? It could have been just a one-time thing, I don't know. Perhaps it was a one-time event where they were holding it? Because I know they did have the old stable and then the new stable. One of them burned at some point.
The old stable.
Old stable burned, I'm not
And I
sure.
don't know when they bought that.
Okay, we're not sure about that.
Masonic Temple.
Masonic Temple is right by the
Next to
Jewish
Temple
temple,
Sinai.
next to Temple Sinai on Hodges Street.
I lived in that time, and I don't ever remember going to Masonic Temple for anything.
Okay,
Was there?
and someone else had a question in the back?
I just, it was interesting to me, I grew up in an old German church in New Orleans, and they had a German service in the afternoon at 3 o'clock. But they stopped that with the First World War because
Because of the discrimination,
and it surprised me
yes.
that they continued to have a German service here.
I don't know, that's a good point, actually. I'd have to go back and check that. He was just saying that, during World War I, there was so much harassment of the Germans, German Americans, and that his experience was that those types of services had stopped during World War I. It's possible that that happened here as well. I don't know for sure. There is a pretty good history of that church, so I just have to go back and check that, which again is in our archives. But they may have just resumed it after the war, once it felt safer. I don't know for sure. Good point, though. Thanks. Okay?
Did you include anything about the school systems early
Yes,
on?
we do have some.
About the city and the-
Yes, we do. We do have some school buildings, and we talk about John McNeese and, the development of the
About
public
working in the
schools.
city schools?
Yes, city schools.
Parish and-
Yes, we do talk a little bit about that too. Sure do.
What about the Italian family?
Yes, we have some Italians. We tried to make sure like I said, we got every ethnic group represented. So all we gave you here was just a little taste so that you can get the whole scoop in the
When
book
did you
itself.
first think about doing this?
I think we were approached, I'm not sure, 2010? I don't quite remember. It took us a long time because we work full-time, so we had to find time outside of our normal work routine to get, there was a lot of late nights in the archives. Fortunately, Jessica has a key, so we were able to do that. She has access and the permission of the library director, so we were able to go in after hours and do this. But it actually was a far more time-consuming process than might look on the surface. Like it's just some photos with some captions, but no, it was very, very time-consuming actually. But it was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed it. Anyone else? Anything else to say?
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Appreciate the opportunity.